There's obviously a difference between a boy, 7, spots a jungle gym, versus a gleeful boy, 7, spots a jungle gym dome amidst seas of children. The book does not teach you how to write. Nowhere in this book does he mention how a writer can construct words on a page to get our audience to feel the way we want them to feel. Okay, so in this video, we're gonna take a quick overview of what Blake Snyder Save the Cat got wrong. Wouldn't be much of an exaggeration to say Across the Spider-Verse was one of last year's best films. You disagree? Fight me. See, the late Blake Snyder might argue that this film had a little bit too much going on and isn't rewatchable because of something that he likes to call Double Mumbo Jumbo. Your script may not have to abide by this rule because we have box office sensations like Everything Everywhere All at Once and Across the Spider-Verse, just to name a few that says otherwise. Number 1, Double Mumbo Jumbo is false. Now, I understand where Blake was coming from because he was simply trying to prevent another Sharknado disaster from being released ever again. I get it. And for those of you who don't know what Double Mumbo Jumbo is, it's basically a screenwriting law that Blake Snyder came up with that states that you can only have one piece of magic per movie. He thinks that having 2 types of magic in your film will have a negative impact on your audience's ability to suspend their disbelief and prevent them from really sinking their teeth into your story. In his book, he states that you can't see aliens from outer space land in a UFO, then be bitten by a vampire, and now both aliens and the undead exist in the same movie. He calls these films like Spider-Man and Everything Everywhere All at Once a moronic product of creativity. Now, if this rule were true, then why are these films doing so well, and why do the stories work so beautifully? Well, we've got to do 2 things in our stories to make Double Mumbo Jumbo work out well for us. Number 1, introduce your audience to the types of magic early. Number 2, give your audience stories that are relatable and down to earth, something that they can really relate to and sink their teeth into. Let's take Across the Spider-Verse, for instance. We already know as the audience that we are going to get a Spider-Man movie, so we're already prepared to see some web slinging action. From the jump, we see multi-dimensional portals popping up with villains coming out with all kinds of different crazy abilities. The earlier we introduce our audience to the various kinds of magic that we want our audiences to accept, the more likely they are to accept those kinds of magic. So if we establish the magic we'll have in our stories as well as the set of rules that that magic has to abide by early enough in our stories, then odds are the audience is gonna buy what we're putting down. Next up, one of my favorite films, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Now, there are more forms of magic in this movie than I can even count. We've got futuristic technologies, multi-dimensional travel, crazy-ass kung fu action. Yes, that is a kind of magic in a movie. We've got an omnipresent interdimensional antagonist that has the innate ability to master the multiverse simply by dialing in her mind. It's a lot. But underneath the story's bells and whistles, we've got a story of a deteriorating family. We've got a parent contemplating divorce, a tragically unfulfilled matriarch who is not connecting with her husband, and we've got a daughter who feels culturally out of sync and completely misunderstood by her family, namely her mother. At its core, this family is relatable to families all around America because many of us know what that feeling of a deteriorating family looks like, what it feels like, and the pain that comes with that. So not only does the story give audiences a lot of magic to grapple onto, but this relatability factor also gives audiences a reason to care about these characters because we're kind of curious about how this family's issues are going to be resolved. Now, before we get to number 2, please give this video a like if it was helpful at all, and also if you're a filmmaker, pick up a Clover Key. It's a camera plate, screwdriver, and a bottle opener, and take a look at my film if you haven't already. It's in the description below. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. Point number 2, these beats must happen where I say. The most famous quote that I can pull from the book is when he's talking about the catalyst. When he says, the catalyst must occur on page 12. You see this in screenwriting groups and Facebook groups all the time. If the catalyst doesn't happen on page 12, no one's gonna read it and nobody's gonna watch it. Now, this is certainly not true, but I'm sure that he and his colleagues have read screenplays where he was reading and reading and reading and nothing of substance happened where they were supposed to happen, or nothing of substance happened soon enough to compel the reader. I have had the unfortunate experience of sitting through someone's read of their screenplay where nothing of substance happened for like 40 pages. And this is the big issue with new screenwriters who aren't familiar with how story works. Here's what you got to take away from this though. As long as you're creating the most interesting read possible, I wouldn't worry about the catalyst happening on page 12. Yes, it is true that we want the catalyst to occur as soon as we've set up our story and as soon as we've set up our characters. But before even thinking about our catalyst, we should really be building our time, energy, and attention to world building and building our characters and setting up the environment in which these characters live. This gives our world a feeling that it's vibrant and full or dirty and dingy, whatever we're going for. And while we're doing this, we've got to keep our characters at the forefronts of our story. So yes, we've got this beautiful environment, but how is the environment perceived through the eyes of our characters? Well, I'll give you an example. Anybody seen season 4 of You? Post in the comments below if you have. So Joe's recently relocated to Oxford. He's been given this new identity where he's this Oxford professor, and many of his colleagues are extremely wealthy. So the writers exposed us to these beautiful, expansive set pieces where these wealthy individuals live. We get an inside look at their lifestyle, how they party, but one thing that makes the setting so fascinating is how Joe perceives all of the rich people living their lives. He notices how his new rich friends treat each other and how they treat those who aren't wealthy. These rich friends allude to how lucky they think he is just to be among them. And Joe is sure to comment on how out of touch these wealthy people are from reality and how that wealth distorted their perception on the poor. Joe's analysis of those around him gives us a ton of insight into how he thinks and operates. So we're shown the environment and we witness how our character perceives this new environment. So Blake is saying the moment that we have acclimated our audience to our characters and our environment, as well as the character's perception of their environment, then something should happen. So that's what he's saying there. But also, while we're getting there, our goal isn't to simply just get somewhere, but it's also equally as important to make the read as enjoyable as possible. I remember when I was writing years and years ago, I would put in my brain, okay, I'm writing to get to the good part. And my brain is like, okay, I'm writing to get to the good part. So let's get through all this drudge and nonsense so I can get to the good part or the good parts. But it's extremely important to make the read as enjoyable and rich as possible for the reader by moderating our story's pace, engaging the viewer's curiosity, embracing your story's theme, and keeping the vision that you have for your story front and center. We're not writing to simply get the boring stuff out of the way and get to the exciting stuff. No, we've got to craft our stories in such a tight and exciting package that our audience can't wait to get to the next minute. So let's take it a bit further. We just don't want to go from beat to beat or plot point to plot point as quickly as possible. We need our audience to enjoy the ride so that when we get to that catalyst or that inciting incident, when we reach that midpoint or that climax, we're infinitely more invested in what's going on and what's happening to our characters. The beats are just strong suggestions based on Blake Snyder's analysis of many, many scripts. Because through his research, he's learned that screenplays kind of lack this sense of urgency. To sum it up, just make sure that your read is interesting and engaging enough so that your audience is invested enough to make it throughout your entire film's runtime. Flaw number 3 with Save the Cat, and it's probably the biggest offender. The book does not teach you how to write. There is nowhere in that book that actually teaches you how to construct a sentence for maximum impact. A book that sheds a lot more light on that is a book called Kill the Dog by Paul Geo. I'll put a link to it in the description below. No notes on syntax, diction, subject-verb agreement, sentence structure, or other grammar cues. Nothing. Now to Snyder's defense, because he's deceased, he's seen a lot of work that lacked urgency. He's seen a lot of these rules broken. He's read a lot of screenplays with poor structure and cliches, and Save the Cat is just an attempt to never see those things be done on film ever again. I get it. But as much as Blake tells us about all of the mistakes that people make when writing stories, it's fascinating to me that he makes the unfortunate assumption that we all know how to construct proper, evocative, succinct sentences. Nowhere in this book does he mention how a writer can construct words on a page to get our audience to feel the way we want them to feel. How the order of words we put on that page can affect how the reader feels and profoundly change the read and influence our story. Okay, let's just assume that you can construct a sentence. Fine, I'm sure that most of you knew that in most sentences, we typically have our subject, our verb, and then our object. But he never goes into his perception of what an optimal sentence looks like and what an optimal sentence sounds like versus what a suboptimal sentence is. There's obviously a difference between a boy, 7, spots a jungle gym versus a gleeful boy, 7, spots a jungle gym dome amidst seas of children. Now both of these sentences could work depending on what you're going for. He doesn't mention how you should optimize your sentence to get your audience invested in your story. Because at the end of the day, you know you've written a really, really good story if your audience feels a certain way after they've read it. So going back to my simple sentence before, are these children in the way of the boy as he's approaching the jungle gym? If so, it's probably a good idea to mention them and add that little detail. Is it important that we know that this boy has glee? Because in a few moments he won't be so gleeful. In this case, we probably should tell the reader that he was gleeful, because the audience will have a clear picture in their mind as to how this boy's emotional state changed. And there's also a million different examples that I could give alone on just optimizing sentence structure to get your reader to feel sadder or surprised, and a million other examples as to how to optimize sentence structure in general, depending on what you as the artist want to have the audience feel. But just things to think about. For the sake of brevity, let's move on to the last point. Number 4, this is the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need. Listen, after I read this book, I felt like I just knew everything about screenwriting, that I knew all of the secrets and all of the nuances and intricacies and all the rules and principles that I needed to go out into the world and win every screenwriting competition, to produce every single film, to do everything that I want to do in my film career. That falsehood could not be farther from the truth, because after you read this book, he literally instills that, or falsely empowers you, that you have everything you need. Also, it's on the front of the book. There's this eerie false sense of security that you get after you close the book. But there's so many different mistakes that you can encounter while writing a screenplay that this book does not even mention. And a few of these topics I cover in this video right here, top 10 mistakes new screenwriters make. And also in this video right here, how to write action in my screenplays. If you've made it this far, please definitely consider subscribing, as there are plenty more videos coming soon. And it's always a pleasure chatting with you guys. Until next time.